Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Willard Preacher Podcast. I'm Matt, a former Penn State student, and I'm joined, as always, by Gary Cattell, Penn State's Willard Preacher. And then we are also extremely pleased to be joined by Matt, who is a fellow parishioner with Gary at the parish, Orthodox parish in State College. And so Matt agreed to come on here and share his testimony, his faith journey with us a little bit. And so that's what we're doing. So I'll just go ahead, right ahead, and turn it over to you, Matt. So take it away.
Sure, yeah, and thanks for having me. It's been I've been looking forward to it. Our whole family just got chrismated a little bit ago, and me and my wife got baptized, so we're brand new. Chrism's barely dry, so to speak. So, um, but yeah, that if you want to learn a little bit about my story, let's see. I grew up in a Free Methodist church, actually, which
Oh,
is
hey, so I didn't, we went to Free Methodist. You know that the church that we go to, that used to be
yeah.
a Free Methodist church.
I know that's what Father told
Yeah,
me that, and I was
and
like,
we used to go there.
really? Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up in a Free Methodist church, which, if for those of you who don't know, it's like a offshoot of the Methodist church. That's a little bit, usually a little bit more like low church in practice, but they have a really, I don't know, distinctive sort of holiness theme that goes throughout the way that they practice. Which, anyways, I was a member of that when I was a little kid, and as you're growing up, like the church you're in as a kid, how much of the theology do you really know of the church you're growing up in as a kid?
Uh,
I didn't know that much, but in high school, get this. So in high school, they had like a Sunday school thing that this guy who was a professor at Spring Arbor College would come and teach the high schoolers like their Sunday school class. And so, we were talking about like, why was John Calvin wrong about Romans 9? What is like, what is the ontology of the church fathers, sort of a thing. Like that type of thing was what we were learning at the end of high
uh,
school. And
that's actually good. That's actually
oh, it was
really
great.
good. I mean, a lot of times you just hear about, Noah's Ark or something all the way through high school or something. You don't really get anything. And then kids aren't ready to go into the real world, because they don't really know anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was, I mean, some people were just bored by it, but I was like, a young dork, and I was like, oh, this is great. This is interesting stuff. I was like riveted by all this stuff he was walking us through, and he's like explaining like Hebrew figures of speech and why he thought John Calvin was wrong. And it's all coming from like an Arminian perspective, which is what he taught. But it was he didn't spend hardly any time on John Wesley. He spent a lot of time talking about Arminian theology, and that was what we talked about in his class at Sunday school, which was great for me though because I loved it. Um, so I did that, and as I was growing up, we had a really great pastor when I was growing up there. He was called Merle the Pearl, because everyone just generally recognized that he was basically like a saint. And looking back, he was a great leader and just a very gentle man, great at communicating the gospel. And
So
he
where
eventually
was this? Where
retired.
did you grow up?
Oh, this was in Chelsea, Michigan, which is outside
Michigan.
of
Okay.
Ann Arbor. Not too. It's like maybe 30 or 40 minutes from U of M. Um, so I grew up there, and that guy eventually got old and retired, and that was, they got a new pastor, as you do, and he was all right. He just didn't click quite the same with our family and some of our family friends. There was no scandal or anything. They just sort of moved on. And they later, my parents went to an evangelical covenant church that we joined. This is much later. I joined it when I was first married, and they were basically evangelical. The pastor was really into social justice, and I don't mean from like, I don't know, some kind of progressive standpoint. It was just like that was the subject he leaned into from a very Christian perspective, and it was good. I don't have anything bad to say about them. Um, I had gone onwards to college after all that, and I got really involved in Young Life Ministries, and I was leading that as a volunteer leader. Uh, and that was where I met my wife. Actually, that's where I met Stacy. We were both leading Young Life Ministries in college at
And
Purdue.
what college was that?
At Purdue.
Purdue.
hmm we were doing that, and this was at a time uh, in this country when it was really popular to argue with like new atheists online. Like that was what everybody was doing, and like bulletin boards and like stuff online and just like chat rooms, like talking to people and going back and forth. And like it was, man, I gotta say, it was, now people seem to care not as much, which I think you've said that, Gary, is like people are just sort of resigned. And back then it was like it was heated. It felt like there was a lot at stake. So I had some people I had
Do you
met.
remember what years? Do you remember what year that was? What years those were?
Oh boy, this would have been 2003 leading up to 2007.
Because that's interesting. Because we had New Atheists out at Willard. I think some of these guys dropped out because they were never in class. They were out there all day long. They'd be arguing and arguing and arguing and arguing all
Yeah.
day long. Yeah, it was like 2 or 3 years, and
Yeah, yeah.
that must have been the same time period.
Yeah, this was the golden age before Christopher Hitchens died.
Which I,
The golden age of new atheism. So I had people that I would be on bulletin boards for other stuff like bands I was into and things like that. And you'd be in the off-topic section and somebody would start arguing with you about theology, and then you come in with all your all the stuff you'd learned in your high school class, and you read your Bible regularly and you were serious about it. And I was a serious in the way that a young evangelical-ish person is sort of serious about it. And this guy had all these great questions, and I don't mean this, I mean he was coming at it from, he didn't like Christianity in general. He was some European, and he was coming at it, but he asked some really good questions, like if Paul wrote most of the New Testament, all the letters and everything, like, and Peter wrote very little of it, what makes you think that Paul didn't just basically like assert his will over what Christianity became, and like a second founder basically overwrote the gospel with his own like viewpoint? And that's a pretty valid question. And then you start asking other questions like, oh well, did Paul really write Second Timothy or some of the later like pastoral epistles? And it's like, yeah, all these
yeah,
questions are not, this is not the point. The point is like I had to get serious just to respond to his points about like who wrote what books of the Bible, even according to tradition. I didn't know, I came out of it and I could quote from Second Corinthians, but I couldn't tell you which books Paul wrote immediately. And I had to like dig back in and basically reacquaint myself with the Bible, studying the Bible, not just like studying what's in the Bible or going through a particular story and all that. I had to like, zoom out a little bit and be like, okay, what is this thing I've been studying and devoting myself to? And that wasn't funny at the moment, but it was like realizing, oh, I did not have a very good big picture of what that all was. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. And this is all kind of one long journey of going through that and trying to grow and having like a mature understanding of all these things. And I had different experiences. Like I had a study group with some friends where we were like, let's find out what we really think about the Bible as adults now that we're college students and fully grown. And and so it's like the most Protestant thing you could think of. We're like, let's set the book in front of us and find out what it means. And it's like, well, honestly, it was a little bit arrogant. Like I'd go back and look at the index and compare the words in it and be like, well, it says here. And I don't know, we were sincere. There was nothing, we were not trying to be arrogant. I think we were just naive. And we read through it and we were very sincere, and our prayer life was great. And the relationships I had with those guys was very good and nurturing, and we grew a lot. But I think I later on, I realized like I was still pretty ignorant. So anyway, I was doing that, learning about scripture, and I had some really interesting problems with solving scriptural difficulties, minor inconsistency. None of it had damaged my faith. Let me say this, that it was really more, I was thinking about the way I thought about the Bible differently. And actually listening to Father Ignatius's testimony was really interesting, because I had a lot of those same things where I'm like, I just found that a lot of the Protestant doctrines about what scripture is that I had grown up with were untenable if you were just a sane person who wasn't so wrapped up in explaining all these details with incredible amount of acrobatics, that I was like, no, at some point it's just a really anxious spirit that makes me give these really complicated explanations. It's not acknowledging something that's staring me in the face, that the document is not the same thing as like what the Quran is or something like that, right? It's not a miraculous book spit from the words of an angel straight to the pages, illuminated, even if I had the autographs, whatever that means. Anyways, this was me
So,
having a new understanding.
So do you remember what some of these issues were?
I mean, I've got notebooks filled with them, but I don't think about it
Yeah,
anymore because I don't
that's
care.
it.
Uh,
Okay.
it was I even have an encyclopedia of Bible difficulties that I bought that just goes through one thing at a time. Like, oh, here it says he had a donkey and an ass, and there it says he has just the, and it's all harmonizing details, fixing things where the Chronicles doesn't match the account in Second Kings. Yeah, just you name it, right? Every little thing that could possibly. Oh, Paul says this, but in Second Peter says this, and those two things maybe don't fit together or doesn't fit with James. All of it. It's I don't know. It's not the sort of thing I'm interested in that way anymore. So I don't
Um,
I don't keep a catalog of Bible difficulties in my head anymore. So I was saying I was moving on from this, and I had a job where a part of my job was rendering videos. I do graphics for a living. I'm kind of an artistic type, I guess you could say. I don't know. Anyway, so I had to do lots of rendering. This was like back in the days when it would take you like 3 hours or 4 hours to render a video, and I didn't necessarily have anything else I could do for a while at work in Detroit. I was working in Detroit, and I would go to this bookstore that was not far from work while it was rendering. And this bookstore this guy ran was insane. I didn't realize at the time, but it was like this guy ran this classic bookstore, and he did not stock his shelves with books he didn't think were good, which is fine, except that like it means like I went in looking for theology books because I was interested. And on this shelf, I actually wrote it down to make sure I remembered. He had from the Paulist Press Classics of Western Spirituality. He had Origen, Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory Palamas, and Pseudo Dionysius all on the shelf that I bought, like successive months, and was reading and was like, what is this? Like, having not read the Greek fathers up to that point. And man, it really blows your mind when you're like, I don't know if I believe Protestant, doctrine about scripture is tenable. And then you read Origen, who had an even higher view of scripture than Protestants. He just thought about it way differently. It's like, holy crud, like this guy understands textual difficulties. He understands like allegory. He understands like the meaning of scripture being complicated and unclear. And then you go through someone like Gregory of Nyssa, who explains the entire life of Moses in a spiritual way, and you're like, oh, that's really, it's just thing after thing. And Pseudo Dionysius was really, it shaped me a lot at the time. For those who've never read him, it's like, I don't know, 5th century Syrian guy who wrote like a really sort of Neoplatonic styled thing about what God is and what it means. It's really interesting stuff. But all this to say, I was super into this stuff. I was asking my pastor about it. This is the guy at the Evangelical Covenant Church, and I was like, "Hey, let's dig in because I need to know like what the Greek in Scripture says if these guys are saying these things, and I want to be able to compare and like understand it myself, and I want to do theology the way they're doing it. It's so new and interesting." To me, it's like the oldest, but I thought it was new and interesting. And he says like, I mean, he was, mind you, this was not a dummy by any means. He was a scholarly pastor, but he was like, you just need to go to seminary because you need to learn Greek to be able to like read these passages for yourselves and like understand it. He's like, I can't teach you Greek myself. You need to go. And I had a full-time job and I was married, and there was no reason my job was going anywhere, and my salary was getting slightly bigger every year. It wasn't terrible work. I was like, I am so stupid. I had no debt at the time, and it was like, well, maybe I'll go to seminary and take on debt so I can learn Greek and maybe write books about the fathers, because this is really interesting. I've been studying philosophy and the fathers and church history all the time now. And I was telling Gary the other day, I had 3 hours of driving a day for a while, where I was driving an hour and a half to work and an hour and a half back. And I just started listening to teaching company lectures and the modern scholar lectures, and like just digesting like, an insane amount of material for like an adult education, trying to get through it. And anyway, so I was doing all that, and I wanted to go to seminary to just explore all this stuff that I wanted to be able to make graphics for, and I wanted to be able to write books about it and do all that. And we went. What happened? I have notes here just on what, so I don't miss
So, so,
important
you, so
stuff.
you graduated college, you're working, and
Yep.
so what? How old are you at this point?
I'm in my mid 20s. Yeah, I'm in my mid 20s, and so me and Stacy take off and move to Denver, where I'm going to Denver Seminary. I didn't know anybody out there at all. We had a friend in our small group who was like, I'm going to move to Denver, I think, and really have a Colorado adventure. He was really into wild at heart. So he was like, I want to have a manly adventure in the wilderness in Colorado. And I've got, my uncle out there might give me a job. I'm like, this is awesome. Let's do it. And we like signed up to move out there, and he like changed his mind and stayed home. and so we moved out there not knowing anybody. And my job was gracious enough to give me like remote work at the time, and like nobody was doing it. And they were like, yeah, we'll just send you projects and you can do them. So I could help pay.
When you say rendering, do you mean like editing? Is that what rendering is?
Yeah, I was doing like video motion graphics type stuff. So like, I don't know, not like 3D, but like a lot of moving transitions and sometimes animations for different things. And it's all over the place, really. I was doing tons of different clients. So yeah, they would send me projects so I could pay for groceries and rent, and then I would just go into debt to pay my seminary tuition. And that's what I did. I went up there and I wanted to do an MA in theology at Denver Seminary. And there was a couple things that happened out there. There was a Anglican church that a lot of seminarians were going to. That was like actually it's ACNA. It was pair at the time, but they're like Rwandan bishops that planted like a slightly more conservative version of the Anglican church here. And this is the same one that Father Ignatius went to, the same denomination.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's, I mean, they're pretty sacramental. They like their liturgy. They're maybe a little bit more spiritual than like some of the more stodgy high church types, but like, it was a really healthy church in my opinion. So we started going there, and that was one of the first steps where we moved from having only been at like kind of low church settings to like really experiencing the liturgy in a way that people meant it. You know what I mean? It wasn't like people that were just doing it out of habit, or people that had been in their grandma's Presbyterian church for like 100 years. And this is just what we do. It was like, these were all fellow seminarians who were like excited about the structure and how to bring it to life, doing it. And so that was really cool.
So what sort of seminary was this? Was it like, was it evangelical, or was it?
No, well, they prided themselves on being interdenominational, in the sense that they didn't want to educate non-denominational pastors. They said, like, you got to pick a creed, but once you have a creed, we'll try to educate you within it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting in the sense that I don't know. It seems to me that the different creeds really require different takes that you would have to spend an entire semester. Well, they tried to give a pretty, and this is what is going to make it interesting. This is like a teaser of why it gets good. So you had to have a couple things. They had prayer retreats that you had to do for yourself as you're growing in that ministry, in your degree. It's just like a degree requirement, was you had to have like spiritual retreats, and you had to have a mentor. And I didn't know anybody there. And I'm not a very organized person. And I came up on the first prayer retreat I had to do, and I hadn't planned one. And I was like, I'll just go to this park by my house that I'm renting, and maybe there's a church. Maybe I was really not into being evangelical at the time because of my experiences with what I had been reading in the fathers and what I had felt about scripture. And I wasn't anything other than Protestant at the time, but I didn't like the way evangelicals did theology. So I'm in the park, and I'm sitting there reading, I don't know, probably St. Gregory Palamas, or maybe John Climacus, one of those two. I'm sitting there reading that, and there's an Orthodox church just around the corner from my house. It's St. Herman's Parish. And I was like, maybe this is like the movies where, like, they just leave it open and you can go in and pray. It's like, that's perfect for a prayer retreat. I'll just walk in and I'll sit in the pews the way they do. And I go in, and it is open, it's unlocked, and I walk in, and like, there's all the icons, and it's an Orthodox church, and I'm like, oh wow, this is great, smells like incense. And I sit down, and I'm having a nice little pious moment in there, and trying to take it all in. And like, somebody comes in and they're like, hello, can I help you? And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I'm on a prayer retreat. And they're like, oh, the church isn't open, we're just like having a Bible study down the hall. And so they just like left the door unlocked on accident, and I wandered in, and the rector there was polite enough to come and sit with me once they're service was done, and he was like, "Hi, who are you?" And I explained. I was like, "Yeah, sorry, I've just been really, and actually, this is some of the people I've been reading. These are, or Greek fathers and stuff. I'd love to." And what happened was, I realized, like, I don't know anybody here. I don't want to ask anybody from any of the evangelical churches to be my mentor. I don't know you very well, but would you be my mentor for my seminary experience? And he was like, "Yeah, I would do that." Like, he didn't answer right away. I bet he asked his bishop. I don't know, but he did it. Um, and so that was like for that whole 3.5 years or whatever, he was like walking with me through the like growth program. I was doing Bible studies at the Orthodox church, meeting with him, every couple of weeks or whatever, and talking about things. And I sit down with him and I'm like, "Yeah, I really want to talk about pseudo Dionysus. I want to talk about, all these Greek, I want to talk about Gregory Nazianzus." And he's like, why don't we read Corinthians? Like, he's like, "Step it back. Like, let's get some fundamentals in place and ask how your marriage is doing. Let's ask how your seminary experience is going." And so anyway, he was really down to earth, and he taught me an awful lot about Evagrius and the Philokalia and all these different things. And then eventually we did talk about some of the other stuff that I was really into. But I think he was putting the brakes on not only my pride, but just you can't run before you can crawl. So we were doing a lot of that. It was really good, and that was also to say something really nice about Denver Seminary. They had an Orthodox spirituality class that was an elective that I could take. And Bradley Nassif from the Antiochian Orthodox Church, who's like an academic, came out and taught it, and it was amazing. And they had Donald Fairbairn, who's like a patristics expert, Protestant Orthodox relationships like specialist. They came out and taught a class, and he let me be his graduate like grader for that class. And I don't know, what else did we have? Something else. I don't know. So all that stuff was going on.
So what are you thinking about Orthodoxy at this point in time?
I had been exploring mystical spirituality as someone who reads it and would love to practice it, but understood that my life was just too sinful to really be a meaningful mystic. I read it, if you read, you're like, gosh, it'd be great to be like that. Maybe I'll get some grace and get some kind of hint of it, but you understand what the saints are doing is fundamentally different from what you're doing at that stage in your life. And I was at this point where reading Thomas Merton and reading about Orthodoxy had saved my faith. That probably would have ended up being nihilism if I kept going in the evangelical Protestant direction I'd started out on. I think I would have said, none of this is true. And where I was getting to is part where I was at this really difficult gap where it was, there's infinity between everything created and uncreated things. And I was doing this really involved research paper on St. Gregory Palamas, and this quarrel that Callistos Ware had with the Archbishop of Canterbury. So I was Anglican at the time, and I was researching an Anglican archbishop versus a gaggle of Orthodox bishops arguing back and forth about whether or not St. Gregory Palamas, his whole theology made any sense in an Aristotelian context. And I ended up concluding what Vladimir Lossky said was that, like, this is philosophical language in a theological context. It's not meant to be an Aristotelian philosophy offered for the church. And I really enjoy. I think Vladimir Lossky was one of my favorite theologians I've ever read. But reading through all this was my point where I was at a point where mystical theology had to be true, or all of theology was useless to me. And Gregory Palamas was what brought me back from, if God is really as strange as he must be, we can't possibly know anything about him. St. Gregory Palamas is willing to say, like, God is not just beyond knowing, he's also beyond unknowing. Like, he transcends this infinite gap between created and uncreated things that would mean we were totally cut off from him in our present day experience. I mean, he wasn't saying that as an abstract concept. He was just trying to explain the monks who had the living experience of God to people who needed to listen to the monks. So that was very much for me like my moment of coming back from quietism, if I believed in anything, was Saint Gregory Palamas, and that's why he's my patron saint now.
So
So we did it.
is that the energy essence distinction? Is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about there?
Sorry.
That
Yes.
you can't know the essence, but God communicates through his energies.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And I don't need to get into all the details of it. I think it's really interesting and really brilliant, and that's why I spent so much time writing about it. And anyway, so that was all kind of my experience, and then my mentor, I think somebody who's in the church, I think she was Hungarian or something, but she said, like, how can you understand these things and know these things and you're not Orthodox yet? I was like, well, it's not that simple, because I was married, I was involved in a Protestant seminary, and my wife Stacy, I had made the mistake of assuming she wouldn't be into it because it was all bookish, esoteric, mystical theology in my mind. It was I would have to sit down and explain, Saint John Damascene's defense of icons for hours to even have you walk in the church and not feel like it was something alien and wrong. And it was all that was my assumption at the time, and I was very much feeling, there's a millstone around the neck of people who mislead when they know a little bit. And I think I was very concerned that I would damage my wife's faith, or even her belief that I had a good faith, if I expressed all this in so many words. So plus, bear in mind, we were at an Anglican church that I really didn't think was all that far off, so I liked it. So we did all that, and the long and short of it is, everyone said, like, we're not really interested in non-PhDs writing books about patristics on any level, especially not popular level. That was basically what came away from it. It was like, they don't care. And I felt good because I felt like it was something I had to do.
You're talking about the seminary now?
Yeah,
Seminary's
well,
not
not the
interested?
seminary. No. This they don't publish books there anyway. But it was more like there were no jobs in the like unsolicited publishing of patristics for popular people.
So you were writing books at this time.
I was working on a introduction to Origin of Alexandria for ordinary church people. And this and Father Ignatius said when I mentioned that, he's like, even I can tell you that's not a good idea. But I don't know. I was probably just too wrapped up I was too self-absorbed to realize that. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's something that'll come to fruition one day. Probably not.
And
but
so you found out that people didn't want to publish anything like that? Was that
they don't even want to read manuscripts from people who aren't PhDs, right?
okay?
And then the other side of it is the academics. They don't. Why would you want somebody who's not? Why would you want to write a book about something that only academics are interested in? Like, that was kind of the thing. It was like, for me, Origin of Alexandria had really been a step upward in my personal piety, devotion, and understanding. And I was maybe a little bit, I had a blind spot to the fact that to a lot of people, it just seems like bizarre church history fixation or some kind of antiquarian fetish or something. They didn't think it made any sense. So, but actually, since I've talked to more Orthodox people, a lot more like, yeah, like. So anyway,
So are you done with seminary now? Or are you still in the
yeah,
seminary?
nope. I'm gonna transition. There's a couple more steps, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. It didn't work out, but I did get a job because I had a master's degree. I was teaching at Purdue for a little while as an adjunct professor, doing graphics and humanities crossover classes, which was pretty interesting. I'm sorry, Gary, you frozen? Oh, there. Okay, we're back. Anyway, I was teaching that for a little while. It was interesting. We couldn't really find a good Anglican church.
Question and answer. So you left Denver. Now you're back at Purdue?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. Now I'm teaching there.
Now you're teaching at Purdue.
Yeah. As an adjunct.
What are you teaching?
I was teaching crossover classes between humanities and technology. Where we would talk about arts, literature, and at the same time, like programming, computer design, whatever we wanted to. It was like a seminar series that we did, and then I taught some classes, introduction to computer. I did a ton of. I taught over 16 different classes in the next couple of years.
Okay, so and you graduated from seminary.
Yeah, I
Or
did
did you,
finish.
okay. So
I
now you're at
finished.
Purdue. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, there was an interesting point where towards the end of seminary, once again, I'm not very organized, and I chose to take the cumulative test, and they were like, "Yeah, great, you're scheduled for like, it's coming up pretty soon," and I was like, "Great, sounds great." And then they like sent us a note later. They're like, "You should have been studying for the last 4 months for this because it should sum up your entire graduate education." I'm like, "I've got 2 weeks. I haven't studied for 4 months," and I was like, "All right, well," and I did the. I just read books straight for like 2 weeks trying to prepare for it, but I also did like this thing where I went to do. I was like, well, if I really believe that like mystical theology is the way, then I gotta like be good for a couple weeks, and then I gotta also, I don't know, try and find that. And I like laid outside of like some old Lutheran church that had a neon blue cross and was like, all right, just gonna stay here until I get some kind of nothing. I don't know what I thought I was doing, but it was neat and it was a nice experience, and I definitely did. I passed the exam, so it worked out. Anyway, that's all.
So anyhow, you were sitting under this blue cross for what reason?
Yes. I
Were
was
you studying?
trying. No, I understood the whole purgative, illuminative union process, and I didn't think I was really in any part of it. I just wanted to have a kind of extended silent prayer and realize that like if I'm going to get through this exam that I didn't really prepare for, um, I'm going to need some help.
Okay.
And so it was. I mean, I wasn't presuming to have an illuminated experience. I was trying to be humble and lay down on wet grass and realize like if I was going to get through it, I'd need to be carried through that. Um, and so I got through all that. I did the. We couldn't find a great Anglican church where we went. Working at Purdue, we couldn't find one. And then a friend from where I worked invited us to go to his Methodist church, and I hadn't been to a actual Methodist. I've been to a free Methodist church when I was a kid. I haven't been to a Methodist church, and it was a really good community. They were really nice, and they were nice to our kids. We had one, and then we had just had our second kid at the time, and we were going there, and then the Purdue thing wasn't working out. Like they weren't ever going to give me a full-time job. It was always going to be like teaching a class and here and there and making just enough money. Like we were like, we were barely making it paycheck to pay like our rent or our mortgage on our house and have enough food. And I didn't see what the heck I was going to do. And our pastor at that church had been promoted to being a district superintendent. And they were like, well, this church just outside of town, like 30 minutes from here, had their pastor removed. We know you have the training. I know you weren't planning on being a pastor, but you have the training. Could you go lead that church and not wreck it, please? and, uh, and they had a parsonage, so it was like you're going to be living for free and have enough money and have health care for a while. And it was like, we don't want you to take this job just because you need it. And it was like, well, okay, but like, what kind of person would say no when you're like, I have no other plans and it looks like it's all headed for ruin? And so, I prayed about it. I didn't take it lightly. And, but I did it. I went out and I was like, I was not planning on being a pastor. I didn't take any of um, they had all sorts of like sponsorships for degrees at seminary. And I said no to all of them because I was like, I won't be a pastor. You can't give me this money. I was like, I could have taken the money, but I went out and I did my first sermon. I found the notes from it the other day, and it was about, I said, look, I'm here. There was a temple that Frank Lloyd Wright built, and he inscribed on it for the service of God and man. And that's what I'm here for. Like, I'm here to serve God insofar as I can. And I'm here to serve you, the people that need someone to lead this church for as long as I'm here. And that was what I tried to do. I tried to give good sermons. I was terrible at doing house visits. I was I was awful at like half the things a pastor has to do. I didn't like doing meetings. I didn't like trying to decide what the church should do. Um, all those things that like those are the vocation, right? And I didn't have it. But we tried to do our best, and we did. They were doing nice dinners, and they were a healthier church, I think, when we left than when we got there. And I think that's about all you can ask for. And they were really lovely. They were really nice people. I don't have very much bad things to say about them. It was my first experience being Methodist though, and it was at like a very turbulent time when you're like, uh-oh, like, you see what's going on at the general conferences and the annual conferences, and you're like, this won't end well. And for me, this was my first time seriously studying John Wesley. I mean, I grew up in like a Wesleyan church, but they didn't talk about him all that much. And Methodists, the ones that are really devout and sincere about being Methodists, they study John Wesley like crazy. They read his sermons. And this is again where I listened to Father Ignatius' testimony, and you can see like, yeah, Wesley knew the Greek fathers better than a lot of Protestants. And and I was saying, I even read when I joined the church, he said clergy should read the Greek fathers. He said they should read Chrysostom and Basil. They should read Saint Ephrem the Syrian. I read Saint Macarius, and my spirit soared. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, I know. So this was, like Father Ignatius said, also, it was a tradition where they had introduced the idea of prevenient grace to make something like a more orthodox situation real, where man can respond to God or not. And this was fundamentally, when I was doing all these sermons, I wasn't trying to convince the whole church to become Orthodox, but I wanted it to be natural for me to refer to events, people, and saints and things in church history that were our guiding force for me. So we did all that, and then COVID hit, and being a pastor got really weird, and we had already been looking for a way to get back to Colorado. And so we eventually, Stacy found a job where I could work doing graphics again for a parachurch organization. And we moved out there and resigned from the church job, which everyone was sad, but I don't think there were any hurt feelings. It was like Scott and Sophia too. It was like 2 years. It was like 2 years. So it's like not that long. It's like 2 church calendar years where you're like, this is only the second Christmas I've ever done a service for, and now I'm done forever. So yeah, that was how it went. COVID hit, and nobody was going to church anyway. And then I sent out a message saying like, hey, whenever you come back to church, I won't be here. It was very sad, but we moved on, and we tried going to an Anglican church again while we were living through COVID. It was friends of mine from seminary that were now leading an Anglican church in Colorado Springs. And it was just a weird season. I don't, you don't meet anybody because everybody has masks. They don't do any events in person because, well, plague. And so we did that. What was I going to say? We moved back eventually when they said that I could work remotely and I could afford real estate out here, and I couldn't afford it anywhere in Colorado.
So you moved back where?
Here. My wife grew up out here by State College, and so we moved out here to be by her family that stayed in the area. And yeah, we were going to a Free Methodist church again. That was just the only one we really found that was doing good things in the community in Phillipsburg when we lived there. And then we moved again, and when this was our time, we were moving. We're not going to move again. No, we're done moving. But we moved for the last time, and when you said like, we want someplace that has good liturgy, because we missed that from the Anglican church. This is going to be the church that we stay at, and that our kids go from age 2 to the rest of their life in with us. We wanted it to be a place that we really thought had everything we wanted. And Stacy was like, well, let's try the Orthodox church. I was like, really? Like, yeah, you sure? Because there's a lot of stuff that's pretty weird about it. And this is what was such an act of grace in my life, was that she found about it through homeschooling people and through homesteading people that she was networked with, that we were doing homeschool, and these people were like, yeah, in the Orthodox church we did it. And it was all these different things that she had been learning about, because we're such different people. I mean, like, we think differently, and we come at things so differently. And so she approaches Orthodoxy from a totally different perspective from me, and we just happen to totally agree that it's the way to be. And so we came together, and it was really me realizing, like, thinking back to this Hungarian woman being like, why aren't you doing it? And my mentor was like, well, some of us just have a different path that takes a little longer. And he didn't seem even fazed by it. Like he spent all this time with me in seminary, like mentoring me, walking me through it, anointing me at the end of my seminary experience, all of that. Like, why would you do that for some Protestant kid? And he just had this confidence that it would work out, I guess. And yeah, so Stacy was getting more and more into it, and like, it was a novelty for me to have my wife be excited to talk with me about a sermon from St. John Chrysostom and be like, yeah, that made my day. And he'd be like talking about something else, like, yeah, Basil was great. He's called the great for a reason. Like, I'm just this massive dork. I'm super thrilled that my wife is even listening to what used to be my like special interest stuff that would just make her fall asleep. And so now, it's been really great to have our lives kind of knit back together in the way that, I would meet Methodist people and be like, well, I have Orthodox sympathies, but I'm a Methodist pastor. I would tell them that, and they would laugh at me. But it was like, sorry, that's how it is. And so, yeah, we've come back around, and looking back at all of it, now that we finally have gone through the catechumenate, and Father Ignatius was smart enough to be like, take your time. And I think is a good humbling experience, honestly, to not be just let into the church. I think it's good. I always think of those old, like, go ahead.
So you came to the church,
Yeah.
and then you just kind of, what was your goal there? What were you thinking? Were you planning on becoming Orthodox, or did you go there thinking, I don't know what we want to do, but we're going to try this? Or
I didn't think she'd go for it. We
Right.
went to Divine Liturgy. I think one of the first ones was like Jesus baptism, I think. Anyway, something like that. And it's the funny thing is I had read a lot of Orthodox theology. I'd read, Pomazansky and Losky and Callisto's Ware and you name it, all that stuff. But it's not like reading Schmemann where they talk about liturgy all the time. So I go in and I'm like, this all follows from that, I guess. Like I was already with all the head knowledge, but all this practice that you do was alien to me still. So I'm still learning all sorts of things, and that's interesting in its own way. But it was kind of like, I was like, that was a pretty long service, wasn't it? And she was like, yeah, it was great. I was like, okay, all right. And so then we keep going, and it's hard for the little ones. They can't sit still always the whole time, but it's great. It's
At this time, what was your thinking at this time? Was your thinking, we're going to become Orthodox, or we're looking into it, or
Stacy is a joiner, so we start going, and she's like, let's join. I'm like, okay, all right, we'll talk to Father and see. And we talked to him, and he, I wouldn't say he put the brakes on it, but he just was like, let's work our way in, and we'll do the catechumenate stuff. And she responds to a challenge by embracing it. And so she's like, all right, we're gonna celebrate the feast days. We're gonna do stuff for saints days at home. We're gonna make little desserts. We're gonna get our prayer table going and do evening prayers with our family and morning prayers together. And we're doing all of it. And like, one of the really, really rich things about the way Orthodoxy works is you don't have to have a spontaneous prayer that you make up every morning. You don't have to have a spontaneous prayer that you say every bedtime. And you pray for the people that you're meant to pray for, and you try to remember some very specific things you want to put before the Lord. But you can simply say, I want to be in prayer, and you have some words to say, and it's like all the exhausting labor of having to emote and invent something every single day for the rest of your life is removed, because piety is not that. Piety is not grinding out some kind of Sisyphus, make up a way to convincingly emote before God every day, twice a day, more than that. Anyway, all that to say, it's been really healthy for us, because it's much more easy to be regular in prayer and let it shape you when you're not, I don't know, relying so much on your own internal prayer energy.
right.
Anyway.
You can still do that, but you have all these prayers from these saints,
Yeah.
that they're obviously close to God, obviously, for being saints, and that came out of their experience. And you can do that as well as the other one. But
yeah, I just mean my experience that made it really satisfying was that you could will to have a regular prayer life, and it seemed possible in a way that it just didn't seem possible before.
Right.
So we did it, and like I said, looking back, I mean, there was so many things that led me into Orthodoxy. It's hard to even narrow it down. It's like, reading Karl Barth talk about how Protestants had replaced the Eucharist with Scripture, and him being like aware of what a weighty replacement that was, and being like, can we even deliver something that will make Christ present the way the Eucharist did? And you read that and you're like, no, you can't. Like, those are two parts of the service, not one. Or I read Paul Tillich, who said that all real faith is mystical, and he was explaining like how that had to be a for real part of it, or it wasn't even real. And all these different things. It's like everything I read started leading me back to the same place where I'm like, well, that's why Orthodoxy makes sense to me. So for me, a lot of it was this experience of grace and being like, I'm excited and I cannot believe that I'm actually getting to like follow through on all this stuff that I thought being a responsible husband meant I just couldn't without risking, the faith life of my family.
Right.
And I think some people are that way. I think other people lean the other direction and they just go forward and they're like, come on, get in or you're out. And, I mean, the monks at St. Gregory Palamas in Ohio were very concerned when I said I was married and we were joining. They're like, is your wife like into it? Like, they didn't want me to join without her being in. They're like, we've seen too many cases where it just shipwrecks people from the faith entirely. And I was like, no, she's into it. She's way into it. She's like into homeschooling, and now she's into it. They're like, oh, okay, well, all right, good, go.
So then, so you go through you go through the inquiry stuff and then the catechumen stuff.
Yep.
And then you want to talk about baptism at all?
Yeah. So it's complicated because because we had been in that Anglican church where they made a big deal out of remembering your baptism. And they had really changed the way we thought about infant baptism. So we had baptized our kids, but we had also like videotaped it, and we had the documents, and we had kept the water, and we have been doing every year a remembrance thing of their baptism and celebrating it. And so like every year we're like, remember, and we would get it out, and we would usually get them some faith related gift, and we'd have a cake, and it was a thing. Like, it's almost like their birthday every year. The accoutrements, like, we don't have records of it, we didn't have witnesses of it, we didn't have, definitely not the water or any of the none of the proof of it. And he's like, well, we usually prove these things in this church. And so it was this awkward position where like we couldn't pretend our kids hadn't been baptized, so protocol is usually to chrismate, and we couldn't show that we had been baptized, so we should be baptized basically. So that's kind of how it worked out, that our kids got chrismated and we got baptized. Yeah, it's I don't know, it's definitely feels like a homecoming for us. And I think Deacon Mark said like welcome home or something when you walk in and you have done your churching ceremony for the first time, and that was really meaningful to me. It feels like home.
So that's after the baptism. You get baptized, and then they kind of bring you you get baptized into the Narthex, and they bring you into the main body of the church. And
yeah.
And then I guess you got baptized on a Sunday morning, right?
Yes.
Sunday
morning. Yes, we did.
And then you then take communion. Then the first one's in line for communion
that day. Yep.
Yeah. That sounds good. I don't know what happened to Matt. He kind of lost him somewhere
out for a sec.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll be back.
But that was quite the journey.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if that was long-winded or short-winded. It felt medium-winded.
That's about the number. Was interesting.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of miraculous events like Scott's. That was really, I enjoyed his a lot. Mine is much more like, it's happening in my head for so much of it.
That's the way mine was too. I think that's the way Matt's was too. Just trying to figure out, is this true or not? And when Karen, my wife Karen, when she first went into, she had grown up Catholic, had some problems with it, wasn't sure about the whole Orthodox thing. she went into this first service. It was like, yes, this is it. It wasn't really it for me. It took me longer to say this is it. I've heard some people they just walk into the service. This is it. This is the way it was supposed to be. I think
Yeah,
David
that's
Swish
Sam.
on here was the same thing. For me, I had to work through all the other stuff first, and then I said, well, all this other stuff is true. So it's supposed to be the true worship.
Yes, I was much more of a what was it? I was listening the other day that I think it was even St. Gregory Palamas who said there's like three classes of people. Like there's the people that are the saints that experience God, and they're the ones we listen to. And there's those of us that believe the saints and we listen to them. And then there's those that don't experience God or listen to the saints, and they're like out of luck. And I considered myself in the middle class of people. you know, I I would love to be a saint, but I am content to listen to them. And it was very much like I think you've said in some of the other podcasts, it was really a moment of realizing I can't make sense out of all this. I can't rationalize it all. Which actually makes Orthodoxy uniquely suited for a post-rational age in a certain sense, where like the arrogance of thinking we could figure it all out is a little bit diminished maybe.
Yeah, but I think, at least from campus, my experience on campus, we've come to the exact opposite. Now they think they can't know anything.
Right.
It went from we can reason it all out to, well, we can't know anything. We can't know the truth. We can't know who God is. We can't know anything. But for the few who think they can, if they do find orthodoxy, they're open to learning about it. But most of them are like, no, you can't know. And you say, well, how do you know you can't know? Well, you just can't know. So it becomes somewhere in the middle where, yes, we're not going to reason it all out, but we're not going to just say you can't know. So in any case, well, that was good. Like I said, I don't know what happened to Matt, but we'll see him on the other side somewhere, I guess. But thanks for coming on. We appreciate you coming
Yeah.
on. And is there anything else you want to say to end it up, or you pretty much
Uh,
said
I
it
think the
all?
only thing I'll say is if I'm still newly Orthodox, so if I said anything amiss, I'll listen to my priest or my bishop. If he says change it.
And our first one, our first podcast, we said that.
First.
If you say anything that's not right, you go with the church, because we're trying, but we might
Yeah.
not always get it right.
Yeah. I'm not a representative. I don't.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
That was good to talk to you, Gary.
Yeah, it's good to talk with you.
I'm sure I'll be
So,
seeing a lot more of you this Lent.
yeah. So you guys can be able, you guys, what are you, about an hour away from the church?
Yeah. Well, we'll try and come to everything we can.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we're fortunate only being 15 minutes, but all right. Well, thanks for coming on. And I don't really know how to turn this thing off, so Matt's not here. So guess we can just I don't know.
Well, I'll turn it off from my end. I don't know.
Okay.
It's good to talk to you, Gary.
All right, good to talk to you.